On my left, Dan Polino, General Manager of the Global Public Sector at IBM, has been working a lot in healthcare and life sciences over the past years. Peter van Manen, Managing Director of McLaren Electronic Systems. Sorry, I got it. Sorry, my order is reversed. It was Nigel Shadbolt, Co-Director of the Open Data Institute in the UK. Then we come to Peter van Manen, Managing Director of McLaren Electronic Systems, and finally Andrew Morris, Chief Scientific Officer for Scotland. Dan, I'd like to turn the floor over to you. You've spent the past 6 to 7 years in healthcare and life sciences, and you're now also responsible for urban public sector, including urban regeneration, e-government, transport, and smart cities. So tons of potential uses for big data. What can it do for us?
Yeah, thank you. First, it was wonderful to hear the aspirations of the commissioner and the undertaking that Europe is going under on big data. I would start by challenging that we are part of a global stage now. A global stage that is competing for jobs. And I believe that you could hear her true message start to come towards the end of her comments when she started to talk about lost generations and the challenges that we all have to create jobs and be able to have our regions be able to be resilient and to be sustainable and prosper in this world economy. The studies show that in 1950, 30% of the world's population lived in cities. By 2030, that'll move to 60, and by 2050, that'll move to 75% of the world's population will live in cities. And citizens around the world will then look for citizen-based services. And they will go where they think they can be resilient, where they think that they can build a sustainable livelihood, and where they believe their families will prosper. Big data is a part of that. And the way that we apply big data into areas such as healthcare with integration and access, nutrition and wellness, the role government will play with understanding privacy, and then last but not least, how we use big data in areas around STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, for the advancement of many of the benefits to society will in fact create jobs. And so as we look about the world, the challenge that's here in Europe is to use this opportunity, the stimulus that's in front of us, this work that is there. It started in 1995 when there were regulatory requirements that were more of a directive. That was only 2 years after really the internet was found or started to take off. So it's 20 years now that we will now come forward with a new set of directives, regulatory issues. This is a journey. This is an important journey. It often starts in regions. And you have some of the finest thinkers here to my left that will give examples about where there's success. I would challenge all of us on big data to think about what are we really trying to build? What are we really trying to accomplish? And at the end of the day, I believe it is about citizen-based services, including areas of healthcare, economic revival, job creation, how we work with the aging population, and all of that has a data element to it. All of it has a data element to it. It will be a journey for us to understand privacy. In my role, working for IBM, I have global responsibility for healthcare, for life sciences, for education, and for all governments. I see the debates. I also have responsibility for the advocacy. So I have an opportunity to voice an opinion. I would suggest that we break it into two very specific areas. One is, what are we trying to accomplish? And whether it's through cohesive funds, whether it's through the work that we're going to do in Europe between 2014 and 2020 to create a level of resiliency, sustainability, and prosperity, in a new world order. We should undertake that with great vigor, and the Commission and the EU will play an important role, and we will look for success that is coming out of the regions within Europe to cast a way that we should go forward, and then we should not turn a deaf ear to some of the wonderful examples that are happening around the world. So the first point that I'd like to make about big data, it's around job creation. It's around being able to use this information around resiliency, around sustainability and prosperity. The second is, yes, we have to pay attention on this journey to how this data will be used. And every day we read about challenges around cybersecurity. Every day we read about data breaches. But yet, let us not be deterred from what we're trying to do. There are ways that you can build scalability and security today. We all do that with our financial systems. There's many aspects of data that we use today. So I believe we can get through those issues. We can come to a rational view of what to use with data, but let us not lose sight of what we're talking about. Because if we do, if we let those issues get in our way, the world will pass us by. The world will pass us by. So big data is around a big opportunity for job creation, economic resiliency, sustainability, and prosperity, and not just for today, but for the generations that follow us tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Dan. You know, I don't think anyone would disagree, but governments are broke. So there is some upfront investment, right, to getting us there, and they're all looking at you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, governments may be broke, but the 2014 through the 2020 program in Europe has 960 billion of euro stimulus. There's 360 billion euro that will be available in three thematic areas: healthcare, pension, and social security. So forgive me for being so bold. I would not let that be an excuse. I would suggest there is money that is out there for organizations that will go forward and that will lead here. And I believe that between 2014 and 2020, 960 billion euro commissioned through the EU, through European semesters to review that and help the member states is a wonderful opportunity for us to unite around this transformation. And I would not use governments are broke. I would look for efficiencies, new shared services models, ways that you can build this. We're seeing that in Valencia and Catalonia regions in Spain. We're seeing some of those areas.
When Vice President Kroes asked for advice, I think that's what she was talking about.
Yeah.
I think she wants some of those models
And they're out there. They are absolutely out there, and we can build upon those. So I appreciate your question, but I would turn it and say there's a wonderful opportunity right now to go forward with the stimulus that's in front of us and some of these ideas.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to turn to Peter van Manen next, who's third to my left. He's going to talk about how McLaren is applying technology behind real-time management of Formula One car driving to the management of intensive care patients at Children's Hospital in the UK, in Birmingham. Peter, over to you.
Okay, well, Formula One as a business is underpinned by data. We use it to develop cars, we use it to race cars. And in essence, what we're interested in is what's happening to the data, how is it changing in real time so that we can influence the behavior of our race cars and improve the outcome. Now, Formula One's not alone in having decisions which are taken in a moment, having a big outcome on the consequential outcome of what something happens. So what we have looked at in Birmingham Children's Hospital is translating some of the approaches that we use in motor racing into the hospital to be able to detect in real time when things start to change with the patients. And the thinking is quite clear that in a moment, which may be a few minutes, it may be up to an hour, a clinician or a nurse has the ability to make some type of intervention that could impact the life of that child. It's whether the child recovers and goes on to be a citizen, paying taxes, benefiting society, or whether the outcome is poor and requires a lifetime of care, or even worse. And so I guess the essence of what we are doing with the doctors and nurses at Birmingham is taking this philosophy of looking at big data as it comes through, before it's stored somewhere, as it's flowing through the pipe, if you like, to be able to decide if something is happening, if something is changing, and to be able to react to that. So I guess the message from motor racing, and it's we're seeing it in the hospital, we're seeing it in other industries as well, is if you can learn from big data and get into a position where you can start applying those lessons live as the data is going through, then you have a better chance to turn the data into decisions. Now, Vice President Kroes mentioned the value of data. I would contend that the real value is decisions, and good decisions will be better if it's based on knowledge, and big data gives us a great opportunity to make better decisions about all types of human endeavour.
Thank you very much. So Peter, what kind of cost savings are we talking about if we get it right with big data in the medical environment? Can you give us any kind of estimate?
An estimate, I would say that you can probably save 10 to 15% in terms of economic cost. That is a guess from my part. There is no control system that I know about where applying feedback ends up with a worse result. The clinical outcomes can be better. The sooner that you can react to a changing condition, the better the intervention, the better chance of a good outcome. So my 10 to 15%, I would say, is very conservative. I guess the challenge is it will provoke different ways of dealing with healthcare. It will provide different ways in which nurses and doctors are used in a hospital, so it will have an impact on the patient pathways. So potentially it's huge. There are a lot of barriers to get through as well.
Okay. One of the things I love about this story is that McLaren got into this business through a serendipitous meeting at a dinner table where you were seated next to a clinician or a physician, and the sparks started flying. So that just shows how the possibilities of big data are really unimaginably large.
Yeah, it just proves you don't have to be two 14-year-olds to talk and to listen.
Okay, I'm going to stick with healthcare and move on to Andrew Morris, who was appointed Chief Scientist for Scotland in 2012 and is also Dean and Co-Director of the Medical Research Institute at the University of Dundee. He's a renowned expert in diabetes and health informatics, and he's done some pioneering work on the management of chronic disease patients with spectacular results. Andrew.
Thanks, Gail. I must say McLaren are very welcome in Scotland, and you must bring your cars too. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Science Business and the Wellcome Trust. I want to talk about knowledge through data in healthcare, and I sense that big data is approaching us fast, but I think we still need to sort data out too before we anticipate that big data revolution. And I'm going to try and convince you that unless we have a proportionate approach to data sharing, it will conspire against our ability to not only deliver high quality healthcare in a systematic way, but also scientific endeavor and economic growth. So I think data sharing is a big issue that we really need to spend a lot of attention on. I'm going to give a case study on diabetes in Scotland, but this is everybody's business. You know, a global challenge that faces us all is that of non-communicable disease. WHO suggests that 38 million people died from non-communicable disease in 2008. And for example, diabetes, by the year 2030, 500 million people on the planet will live with diabetes. So it's good for me because I'll never be out of a job. But it's a challenge for healthcare economies because those patients will suffer from heart disease, kidney failure, stroke, amputation, and blindness. So there's a major challenge here. And this is not pure and simply a health challenge. This is about economic sustainability of countries. The World Economic Forum in Davos suggests that chronic disease will cost the world economy $47 trillion in the next 30 years. So this is a major issue. And it's complex. You know, if you are all 65 years of age, we've got data from 2 million people in Scotland to suggest only 20% of you would be disease-free. The majority, 60% of people have 2, 3, 4, 5, or the most 12 chronic diseases. So comorbidity is going to be a huge challenge for us, and data has to be the solution. I would argue that healthcare is the last major industry not to be transformed by the information age, and it's time we sorted that. I said that at a meeting in London a few weeks ago, and someone put their hand up at the back and said, no, shipping. But, but you know, we're not in very good company if shipping and healthcare are the last. And if you look at healthcare systems internationally, they tend to be good at episodic care, but chronic surveillance of disease, which often needs 5, 10, 15 different professional groups, geographically separated and over time, isn't good. So integration is a real challenge. And most healthcare systems are characterized by waste, duplication, and harm because of lack of real-time data. To answer your comment, Gail, a greater person than me, Robert Kelly from Thomson Reuters suggests that there's $700 billion of waste in the US healthcare system because of duplication and also fraudulent activity because they don't have the data. So Scotland's a little place. It's 5 million people, but we talked over lunch. I think 5 million is tractable because we've got friends from Scandinavia here, Sweden, where this stuff happens reasonably well, where you have a denominator of 3 to 10 million people, because I do think that's tractable. So Scotland's sort of at the north of the UK. We've got 2 great football teams as well. I've got to put in a plug for them. So I usually say Dundee and Dundee Reserves. But what we did 20 years ago was recognize that we could map that journey of care from general practitioner to pharmacist to hospital to laboratory in real time. We used a unique patient identifier. We put governance in, and we identified all people with a chronic disease, diabetes living regionally, and now we've scaled it to Scotland. So every day we share information over 1,000 general practices, 38 hospitals in real time to give us that journey of care. Multidisciplinary teams all access and contribute to that record. Since 2007, 95% of every person in diabetes in Scotland has had their key process measures done on an annual basis. What we've subsequently seen is a 40% reduction in amputation, 45% reduction in blindness, just because of that systematic surveillance at scale as a nation. So it works. It's not rocket science. It works. However, I think the trick for Europe is to collect the data once and use it often. So on top of that platform, we're seeing a convergence of care and research. So we've got a clinical trials capability. John Parkinson's here. He uses electronic data to screen for eligibility for trials. Our trials have gone up 300%. We use data to look at policy. For example, the smoking ban. Is there a smoking ban in Belgium in public places? Yes. Oh, good. Well, you can't really randomize that. But we went to our politicians and said, we'll use routine data to look at the impact of the ban. Before the ban, in 300,000 kids across Scotland, 5% increase in admissions to hospital for acute asthma. After the ban, 18% decrease. Great use of data to reinforce policy to demonstrate value. If we had to get consent for that study, we published it in the New England Journal, we wouldn't be able to start it because we're using routine data. And lastly, and I'll be quick, is anticipation of the genomic age. You know, Blair, Clinton, Craig Ventnor, and Francis Collins launched the genome in the White House 12 years ago. You remember that? They had a big celebration. That took 300 scientists, 15 years, $3 billion to do one genome. We're now, friends at Illumina Life Technologies, probably about $4,000 in a day. And we'll see a tipping point when a single genome, whole genome is cheaper than a single gene test. So that's my big data coming down the tracks. And we've got 200,000 people consented in Scotland for linkage of genetic data to electronic health record data. And we're discovering new biology and unraveling, well, starting to unravel the complexities of individual drug response, so-called pharmacogenetics. So I think this is a really exciting space, but we will not leave the blocks unless we have a proportionate approach to data sharing, not only for patient care, but for research. Because if some of the suggestions that are being mooted come through, I think it could stop us in our tracks. And our last comment, in the early days, to get permission to demonstrate that reduction in amputation as a nation, it took us 56 approvals and 19 months of correspondence to get the permissions to actually analyze the data. That is not sustainable. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Has that changed in the interim?
It has changed. There's a lot of activity in this space. There was a great report last week by Dame Fiona Caldecott, which I think it chimes well with Europe and international. It sets up really sensible standards. So we now have a privacy advisory committee which can have single sign-off.
Well, that's certainly a model I'm sure that the Commission will be interested. I was about to say you made it look so easy, but I guess it wasn't easy.
I'm great.
Okay, well, fascinating examples, and I'm very eager now to hear what Nigel Shadbolt has to say, co-director of the Open Data Institute, together with Tim Berners-Lee. He is professor of artificial intelligence and head of the Web and Internet Science Group, Electronics and Computer Science at the University of Southampton. And with over 400 publications, he's clearly creating his own personal mountain of big data. Nigel, over to you.
So I want to make a few qualifying remarks because I think in the context of lots of excitement around big data, it's really important to recognize. To what? Pose. My mobile phone. Turn it off. There we are. There we are. Throw it away. Throw it away. Throw it away. So just put it over there or out the way, or I must remember to get it. Okay. We talk about big data an awful lot, and actually the truth is that since Tim and I got engaged in trying to open up public data in the UK in 2009, and we've been on a heck of a journey, you know, a long and winding road sometimes to get the data released. What we've come to realize is that huge amounts of the really truly valuable data is sitting in government in spreadsheets, in disorganized spreadsheets very often, with no semantics, no understanding of, well, the people who generated it kind of know what it means, but it's not been done very systematically. But often these data sets are the Rosetta Stones for all the other big data assets. So there is and I use the term broad data to characterize this landscape is full of data of different sizes and shapes, personal, closed, aggregate, non-aggregate, open, a whole range of stuff. And actually, it's important to recognize that. I think it's important to recognize that in the kind of tools and methods we develop. Certainly at the high end, and of course, one person's big data is another person's trifling problem. You know, it just depends where you are on the scale. And it's great that we're getting lots of investment, I think, in the understanding of algorithms and methods for large data analysis. But let's not forget the rest of it, because as we have unlocked data in the UK, we've noticed this extraordinary value in the barely regarded spreadsheets sitting around in various departments. Now, actually, one challenge for us is to know what the inventories of those data sets are, and that very seldom is an object of open data in itself. What is held? What's the stock of information? And as we move into the data age, being much more much more careful and professional about understanding what's there. We're going to need a new class of professions. People talk about data scientists, but information scientists and librarians are going to have to reinvent themselves to be some of the stewards and custodians of this stuff. And I think it's going to be an interesting place, a new kind of profession that we'll see evolve. Now, the Open Data Institute was set up under money granted in 2011 by the Chancellor to kind of essentially try and find the value in open data that was being released. And we're based in Shoreditch in London. We're essentially, well, we're not a startup any longer, but we're a startup for startups. So we actually use convening network power, because what we've noticed by landing in Shoreditch around an agenda around exploiting open data, lots of people have come to us. We currently have 6 startups in residence, and I'm going to mention 3 of them because they illustrate very well how value is being generated out of these open data assets. And I would say the other thing we've noticed, it's not about the open data per se. It's about, and this has been alluded to, it's about an open license so that you can actually exploit in ways that are entirely open to you in a variety of ways. It's about open standards, crucially, getting out and away from proprietorial standards that are locked in, variously restricted. It's about open data, yes. It's about open participation. And that set of opens gives you open innovation. And what we're noticing is that, and this is a very different way of getting your research done, is that it's like those 2 14-year-olds, but it's like companies are also discovering that if you don't have the capacity to do the R&D on some of the data that you've been collecting and sitting on, maybe the best thing is to put it out there and get other people to innovate, and you get the benefit of the services back. And that's starting to happen. You're seeing this increasingly. Government's finally got that by owning its data. It's now got a whole slew of applications that it didn't have to pay for and probably would never have produced very efficiently in the first place. So this data as a platform argument seems to be very powerful. Data as its own interoperability platform is also very interesting. So if you put the work in, and actually the Vice President referred to this, you put the work into these standards around metadata, very kind of pedestrian and boring stuff, but actually essential to allow interoperability between data. So the Open Data Institute, we're sitting there trying to do 3 things essentially. One is to improve supply. So there are issues around people generating high quality data that is open and appropriately licensed. Stimulate demand. And so our view is absolutely, if you don't have a healthy demand pull on this data, actually, I'm not sure the open data revolution will actually just kind of continue from strength to strength. You need to build the ecosystem that's pulling it in and complaining when the data is either poor, switched off, gets sold off, or whatever. And thirdly, is about training and capability. And I think we have to really address that issue, that there's profoundly sets of challenges both in the public and private sectors about people equipped, both at a policy and a technical level, to exploit these data types and varieties. So let me give you 3 examples just briefly. One is around corporate data. So we have a startup, Open Corporates, and they're doing something remarkable. They're harvesting the world's company data. Now in the UK, we have a trading fund actually called Companies House that holds the register of legal companies in the UK. What Open Corporates are doing is that they're taking that data and they're enriching it. They're essentially adding lots and lots of information about beneficial ownership, who owns what, where are the offshore subsidiaries. It's now harvested 56 million companies' data in countries where there is no company register as well. In the US, there's quite an interesting challenge that individual states are responsible for this in many cases, and some of those don't have machine-readable registers. But Open Corporates is putting this information together, and suddenly it's able to answer questions about co-ownership. Interestingly important question when you have a collapse and you want to know who is going to be liable ultimately for the loss in this company. Who are the co-beneficial owners? Where do they actually reside? The rest of it. So this is turning out to be a really powerful model. It's kind of, it'll be disrupting businesses like Dun & Bradstreet, I mean, for sure. It'll be actually challenging companies who have made money by having kind of a monopoly on the data to say, well, this stuff is now openly available and we will do new kinds of services on top of it. Another example is spending data. For the last 2 years now, every local authority in the in England has been publishing, and Wales, have been publishing their spend data. Every month, everything they spend over £500 is published. Okay, there are classes that are redacted because they have personal information in there, but generally the data's out there. This is a lot of data. We now have companies doing analysis on that data, and what do? Well, the first thing they do is do business intelligence analysis to sell back procurement advice to the local authorities who generate the data. Because they have no idea that they're paying 3 times what the other local authority are for this service or that, or that they could actually do a collective purchase deal together because all 4 of them have the same requirement. Very interesting analytics in the spending space. And I will come back to a health example because these do command people's attention. A small startup in the ODI working with Ben Goldacre and some clinicians took a very interesting data set in the UK. It is all the prescription data that is published every month by every GP. That's open data. So every prescription that is written out, the drug, how much, the dosage level, not who to, right, is published as open data. That data was crunched over. They took one class of drugs. They took statins. And they estimated that in 1 year, the NHS would have saved £200 million on that class of drug had the GPs been prescribing the generic as opposed to the licensed version. Now that roughly scales, they think, to about 1.4 billion across prescriptions in England. Okay, that's a saving. That gets people's attention. It's absolutely not a model, it's all the data. And it's normalized for the fact that some of the licensed versions are more effective on side effects than others. It's not just, simple-mindedly analyzed. But we now have this extraordinary league table. If we choose to produce it, we can see who overprescribes most by practice, by GP, by area. And the question is, what do we do with that? What kind of feedback system do we build to align incentives to get the benefit of that insight? So that's why I think this whole area is so fascinating. And a final point, it relates to the personal data. I noticed Neelie Kroes was wearing one of these fuel bands, very, very, very modern of it. She's collecting kind of her health data on a daily basis of how far she walks. Nike don't make this data openly available. It's hard, I can get at mine, but it's not in a format that we can all agree to share yet. It will be. That world where we generate large amounts of data, as the lady from Warwick was saying, large amounts of our own data that will outweigh, in some sense, enterprise data. The personal data is, how does that sit? Who has ownership? And whilst we're concerned for privacy appropriately, if we don't do the right thing to empower consumers and citizens to get their own data back, we could have an incredibly chilling effect on the kind of innovation we'll see in this space, which is that my data combined with open data in the health region provides a huge opportunity. I now can decide whether the elective surgery I want is from this surgeon technically with this hospital infection rate for my particular condition. Now, if people really believe in choice, that's where you'll get it from, by individuals knowing that the data suggests they've got a better outcome here than there, or there's better care here and there.
You need a lot of curators and librarians to get to the point where we can... Okay, fascinating. I'm just curious, on those 3 examples, are they all startups?
I chose all of those. No, actually, the spending one are quite established, mature businesses. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's.
Are the startups getting funding? Is that a problem?
The thing that's good about the Open Data Institute and this movement, the interest around data, is that it's a convening place where investors, the best kind of money is often a contract. People with a problem to solve are being put in contact with them. So I'm happy to report that yes, they are. And actually, significantly, one of those companies have just closed a deal with a newspaper in the UK for weekly data analytics. So yeah.
Terrific. Does every country need an Open Data Institute? Is that the
of course,
message?
Of course. Actually, that's we have been very delighted and surprised and a bit overwhelmed by the amount of international interest. And there is a question we have for ourselves about how we can provide a template for those countries and jurisdictions who want to do something similar, and watch this space is what I would say on that one.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to open this up now to questions from the audience, and I see a hand going up right away, but also we'll be attentive to questions coming in from the net.
Please again state your name and your institution, please. Jeremy Fleming from Euractiv. I wanted to ask a question to the last speaker on how many of those startups he thinks may be challenged by data protection regulation coming in. And also, is there an aspect to what you're doing which is a little bit like Russian oligarchs mining the states or the reserves that belong to the public and selling them cheap to individuals who don't necessarily have any more right to them than others?
Gosh, whoa. Oh, well, let me take that one first, actually. Okay, Tim and I's position is very simple on this. I think that public data, that public sector information has been paid for out of taxpayers' money, and in general, we should be able to get it back. And the public task data in particular, we believe quite strongly, is a public good. And countries should be thinking about the essential core national data sets that are a core national infrastructure. And Tim has this great phrase. He says, the power of information is in its widespread use, not just charging a monopoly rent for it. And I do have a strong view that this is actually working to get value back to the citizen. Your first point, I think, there is generally a worry that I'm a huge advocate of privacy, written books on it, and understand that we have an absolute right to expect regulation and legislation to protect our privacy. But we're living in a different technological age, so we can't rely on practical obscurity, the fact it's too hard to put stuff together to stop stuff being discovered. But we can rely on legislation to go after people who do inappropriate things for it, that legislation which that's on the books. But what would be bad is if we got such overbearing legislation that actually it just does things that aren't credible. I have to say, the delete clause just seems to me insane. You can't make technology forget in the way you want to. It's just not. You might choose to lobotomize yourself.
Explain that.
So, well, there's a proposal in some of the legislation that there'll be a right to be forgotten, and how that plays out. One of the problems is that how will that enact? How will it work in a world in which copying is the new abundance? It's just no cost at all to copy, transmit, go viral, not track down. How do you know where information is? The real protection there is to ensure that if information is used inappropriately, you will be held accountable. I think accountability is the real strength here. And I worry slightly that people in pursuit of perfectly legitimate aims around privacy become such advocates that they actually act in a rather paternalistic way, saying, we know what's best for you and your data, and we're going to stop you being able to even get at it to do certain classes of activity and service on it.
Okay, thank you. Have we got another question?
Well, we've got a question here from the internet, if that's okay, Gail.
Sure.
And I'd like to remind people who are watching this at home or at their work, you can send us any questions via email at live@sciencebusiness.net. Once again, that's live@sciencebusiness.net. The question we have is from a Juan Bertolin, and he's asking, how can the EU Commission or any government measure the impact of open data and investments in systems? Any KPIs? What would you recommend? That's for the panel.
Set some experiments up to do it. I mean, I think you've got to invest in the economics and the analysis. We've had this challenge a lot in the ODI. And I think the economics has got to get a bit smarter. I think it's a bit of a challenge to a lot of economists to work out how does a product made available for nothing at marginal cost generate external value. Well, all the evidence is it does. Let's get in there and do the detailed analysis is what I'd say. And I think the Commission has to think about promoting and supporting that kind of work at the point at which data release is being made. We've got some great examples actually in the health area. I think you point to those where, a change, you can't causally prove it, but for example, when the infection rates were published in the UK in England for hospitals, MRSA infections and the like, the league tables that resulted, there's been an 85% reduction in infection rates in those hospitals, in part because the data was public. Now, you want more examples like that where you can put a cost benefit on these things, I think.
I would offer a couple of thoughts. First, just on the procurement process, you're starting to see regions stand up shared services models. In the past, decisions were made for eligibility and health care, pensions, Social Security, et cetera, in silos. And so the acquisitions that were made for applications and technology and capabilities within those silos. Today, you can start to use eligibility across all those citizen-based services. You can start to use some of the same analytics across all of those. And you can stand them up in a shared service that would be analogous to a potential private cloud for that region. Those data models, those procurement processes, those service delivery options are far different today than they were just recently, and they're just in their infancy of taking off. If you were to benchmark what it used to cost to stand those up in silos versus now do that in a shared services model, you'd see a considerable change just in the procurement. The comments you were making and that we talked about within Scotland and other places around the world are then the benefits of the outcomes of those types of models. So I would offer back to our question from the internet, the savings really come in at least two very specific areas. One is the procurement process, the second is outcomes, and then the third area I would just suggest is a infusion, and that is if you do this right, you will attract more jobs into your community, you will change your tax base, and you will have a resilient society that looks far different because of your approach.
No one so far has talked about manufacturing. Is there a manufacturing application? I imagine sensors on a production line that can really develop some great productivity savings.
Well, I can give you an example from our own application. We manufacture racing cars very quickly. We're making over 3,000 components every week. We couldn't do this without access to big data. We couldn't do this without using simulation to be able to see what impact a change might make. And if you read that cross into other manufacturing areas, by using data, by learning from history to be able to create a level of prediction, you can keep production lines running, you can optimize their performance, and so you can improve manufacturing. And in so doing, you can introduce manufacturing back into communities where perhaps they've been sent offshore because it's a different model of manufacturing. It's not just a cheap labor base.
Peter and I were talking earlier about McLaren and your question on manufacturing. So my example may not sound like a manufacturing line, but when I give you the details, you may think it is. Probably everyone in this room has been aware of a family member or friend or someone that had a baby that was born prematurely. And the reason why I'm confident of that is because 1 in 14 babies in the globe are born in a premature state. Babies that are born in a premature state are then put into a NIC unit. NIC unit is a special crib that then monitors 250 different senses on the baby, looking for different predictive modeling to be able to determine if there'd be an adverse event or not, and then try and help that baby be a benefit to society versus a drag on society. Given the challenges of shift changes, trying to have predictive information, you can then see the whole notion of a McLaren where you're looking for speed, accuracy, and action into the early days of a baby's life. And unfortunately, the facts are, it's almost like a manufacturing line. If 1 in 14 babies are born in a premature state and their first entry into the world is the NIC unit, where they're wired for 250 different sensors that are monitored every 30 minutes to determine whether or not they're going to have a healthy life and be a burden to society or a contributor to society, there's no better example of a manufacturing line that's important to us with speed, accuracy, and action than how we handle those 1 in 14 babies that are born around the world by putting them into an environment where big data can make a difference for them and for society at the early stages of their life.
Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, let's stick with the premature baby theme, because I think everyone has the notion of prematurity before 32 weeks, but an application of big data, again using Scottish data sets, we linked the nationwide maternal data set with the educational achievement data set anonymously. And what we showed is there's a small but significant impact if you're sort of 35 to 37 weeks. So even in the very mild sense of prematurity, there actually maps on to. And what's that? Because as we know, people have elective cesarean sections, and maybe they have them slightly too early, actually. So again, it's at the population level as well as at the individual level.
Fascinating. I used to cover the auto industry, so I was imagining sensors on all those robots along the production line. Any other questions? Yes, we have a couple up front. Dwayne?
Anne Broenvels, PX Healthcare. Having worked in the healthcare arena and life science arena for a while, and having worked with open data, we've come across some very interesting issues and problems, as well as resource matters that I would like to have your opinion on. Just one example is that we were researching some open data from a US university, and actually not having all the variables, obviously, that matter to the data. We identified a huge schism in the data at some point, having really good biostatisticians and bioinformaticians, actually. So we termed this factor that caused this schism in the data, we called that the scary factor, because we had no idea what it was. And we were fortunate enough to have good enough biostatisticians and bioinformaticians to notice that. A lot of other people in our field researched the same data and never came across that factor. Two questions. First of all, based on this data, based on the results, we have outcomes, we have decisions, knowledge. Important decisions can be made, as for example, the Chief Scientific Officer of Scotland mentioned. But do we have enough good statisticians and informaticians to actually notice all the pitfalls, and what are the safety nets you would use?
First, the data sets that you're looking at. We're moving into the third era of computing in the world. The first era of computing was tabulating. Everything from abacuses to scales to just devices that counted all the way up to calculators. The next major era of computing was around applied logic. We took what humans knew and then we scaled it. Many people would remember that as billing, inventory control, accounts receivable, GLAPR for general ledger, accounts payable, et cetera. And many companies still make a lot of money selling applications today. You could name many of them. We're in a new era, knowledge and insight. We're on the beginning of that. And so with knowledge and insight, the data sets that you look at do not necessarily need to be within the walls of where you receive that information. You can start to reach out. And so what's important that we train and teach going forward in this world of knowledge and insight is let us not fall in love with the answer, but let us know and fall in love with the question. Many of us grew up in an era where you were given extra credit for knowing how to use a card catalog, microfiche, go research. And oftentimes your professor would go to the end of your dissertation or your document and look to see where you went to go receive those sources of information. Today, that information is so readily available that no longer is there credit given for being able to know how to navigate that type of system. But yet the credit now should be, what question did you ask yourself? And then what data sets did you go look at? And then I think then it allows us to start thinking past where those chasms may be, where those holes are that might be isolated within the walls of a certain university or an academic, but you'll start to see patterns emerge as maybe you start to ask questions on oncology across the 23 national cancer research centers around the world, from Karolinska to Germany, to City of Hope in Los Angeles, to British Columbia, where they have 30 years of longitudinal data, to Memorial Sloan Kettering, to MD Anderson. Why can't we go ask those kind of questions across those leading organizations to see what that looks like? And then the variances will start to come down because the sample sizes will be much larger, and we will be able to then have better determinants. Your question now is, are we training people to fall in love with the question? And that is the great challenge that is in front of universities today as to how do we train the leaders for the future. And I would offer you, if you thought of one thing that I would leave with you, and that is, as you teach your children and your grandchildren, teach them to fall in love with asking the question, not immediately go to the answer.
Yes, I think actually there's a very powerful line in the, as you aggregate more and more information, you get this unreasonable effectiveness of the data that actually sometimes the natural statistics of the data can kind of show you the potential, give you real potential insights. But I think you really are right about this challenge, which is, and in fact, we've had very interesting dialogues with our statisticians in the UK. The Office of National Statistics is there by law to actually make informed decisions and produce analyses that are free of, for example, political interference, and that they're properly sampled, and the methodologies are in some sense statistically rigorous and robust. And I think there was a sense amongst many statisticians that all of this open data and raw data movement was very, A, professionally threatening, and B, dangerous. But what we've begun to observe is that, one thing I would say about professionally threatening is that everybody's a statistician, or in a real sense, the claim would be that this is going to massively widen the opportunity for those skill sets. They're going to have to adapt and change into different methods and techniques, of course. The issue around care of interpretation and being sure that you're not missing some huge, set of hidden variables, or potentially your sampling is so bad, or the noise so bad, or there are just errors, as we know. And we've got classic examples of that in nothing less than the GDP productivity of countries, because people mistranscribe. This stuff happens, and I think that we've got to become much more alert to the context of interpretation, to the context in which the data was collected. And many times what that will suggest is we're not collecting the right data. The data's been collected for all sorts of weird policy reasons that no longer apply, or it's just incidental to anybody's real interests. So there will be an issue, I think, around what not just what we can collect, but actually what's going to address the questions that we think are the important ones as well. And that it may turn out to require some investment, of course, in many cases.
Yes.
I think, especially in our domain, it's a major issue, data quality. So we've just set up an MRC network across the UK, and definition of metadata, provenance, curation, and how data definitions and diagnoses change over time is really important, and we're not where we need to be. Just to illustrate it, John's heard this before, but in the early days, one of my researchers came running up to me to say, I found 5 people walking around the streets of Glasgow who, according to the health service, are dead. He said, what will I do? I said, being an academic, I said, well, publish it. So the life after death range was 1 to 4 years, and the resurrection rate was 0.04. So, but these are real, and if you're not immersed in the data and the metadata, this can be a real challenge. So I do sympathize. The key to it is to get data collection at the point of care, rather than remotely.
Kind of worried you were going to say, kill them. Make the data right, but I would offer to you just a little bit of hope here. So did anyone watch IBM, Jeopardy, Watson? Hopefully you all had a chance to see that, right? And so we've put Watson to work, and we've done that in something called utilization management. Physicians will understand that. But in cancer, we've come up with just amazing initial findings. Let me just share with you. Memorial Sloan Kettering, we applied information, all of their information, 12 years of longitudinal data, plus external sources. And for those of you that follow oncology, you know the facts. 50% of the diagnoses are not correct first time. cancer costs are rising 23% annually, and unfortunately there's certain treatment patterns that are started that actually will kill you over time versus help you. So if you're going to go apply some most advanced technology, you would try and do it in cancer. Plus, there's so many different types of cancers, it makes it very difficult. Our work with Memorial Sloan Kettering showed that in the practice patterns, taking the information, broadening the reach, we went from 50-some-odd% first diagnosis correct to 90% diagnosis first time correct. At MD Anderson, with leukemia, with a very specific blood type, their words, not mine, they took to a positive treatment, which would take 3 years, down to 10 months. This is where big data gives us tremendous aspiration, where we can expand the information that we have in our existing walls, look externally for best practices, fall in love with the question, bring it back, apply it. And this is just the early stages. We're in the beginning of this major era of knowledge and insight. We're leaving applied logic and we're moving to knowledge and insight. And the initial applications of big data with technology like Watson in meaningful areas such as cancer are showing profound impacts, just like some of the examples that you're hearing here.
I'm so glad you got to that. I'm a big fan of Watson, and I'm fascinated by this example. Are we going to have 100 or 1,000 Watsons someday dealing with climate change and health and energy sources? What's the future?
Well, having launched Watson in healthcare, I can tell you, it's 41 subsystems that take a tremendous amount of information, nurses, caregivers, clinical data elements to start. Watson will follow a traditional technology curve where it will be in your hand over the next period of time. And then the applications will be only as smart as we are within the questions. I will share with you the data models of how you make money. Memorial Sloan Kettering, 3 specific areas. In areas that they have specialty, they will create a service that they will allow physicians to sign on to. So when they look at diagnosis, they can then sign on to what Watson is doing from Memorial Sloan Kettering, and it's a service that you could procure to help your practice. Number 2, they will then help you with workflow and process. They'll have subject matter experts that will come to your hospital system and they will help you think about standing that up into a cancer oncology center. And number 3, they will actually come proctor. And in today's world of cost cutting in healthcare, certainly in the US, Medicare, Medicaid, but around the world, the challenges that we have, every self-respecting CEO of a hospital system that believes that they have a specific value proposition that is better than someone else, they're looking for revenue diversification. And this is a tremendous opportunity to be able to take your expertise and take it out where it matters and create revenue diversification in using big data as the driver. So that's just one example. You may have seen we've just recently launched Watson into call centers. We've all had experience with call centers and Watson will be applied to that. And Watson is, we're doing a lot with governments. We are doing work around climate control and others. So you'll see more, but we wanted to go to healthcare first because we thought it had the most meaning in the shortest amount of time to prove we could really make a difference.
Fascinating. Well, we're running up against the coffee break. There are a couple of questions. I would say we take 2 very short questions and then we'll break for coffee. And you can continue the conversation in the corridors.
It's John Parkinson from England and Clinical Practice Research Data Link. The change agenda. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, it was years. I think we're in days and weeks now, and if I can use your example, Nigel, of the fabulous statin result, which today is absolutely correct, but my group, within a few weeks, is probably going to produce a result that says, actually, the more expensive branded one is more cost-effective. So we're going to have to, it's not only us, we're going to have to teach the world to live in a changing data environment that the result today is a different result tomorrow. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and I think that there are no absolutes in this. What you're doing, I mean, the arms race around more powerful understanding of the data you have to hand. That's what this is all about, you know, and we see it in examples that talked about here today. And I think it is going to be challenging because it's about contextual interpretation again and again. We keep coming back to that. You know, what is a plausible set of claims, and how can you decide between competing ones? Because when that result comes out, it'll be interesting to see how that is contested and whether or not it actually applies across. Is that the same result for other types of drug? You know, we don't know yet because there is so much to do in this space. But I absolutely think we shouldn't be standing on the notion that we've got a great result here and that's insight nailed. Absolutely isn't. Yeah.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Irene again from Warwick University. The question I have is, from what I hear in the room, there seems to be a big divide. It seems to be there's a whole lot of things that science is doing on the statistics and analytics side of things and creating these cool things. And then for some reason, we are depending entirely on firms and entrepreneurial activity to get that into market. I mean, the elephant in the room is there are social scientists who help engage with people to get things to market. But somehow there is no research I see in that space that seems to be invested into, that seems to help connect the science to the entrepreneurial, to the business. Can you comment a little bit about that, or am I just completely wrong?
Who would like to take that?
Well, I'll make a comment. I don't think you're completely wrong. I think you're half wrong. And the reason is because the type of innovation that you're challenging isn't just with entrepreneurs in these innovation centers. I have a chance to work with the great companies around the world in these spaces. And so Karolinska does wonderful work in what they're doing in cancer. The German National Cancer Research Center with what they're doing on genotyping is spectacular. The work that goes on in Beijing in cancer research is amazing. City of Hope in Los Angeles. I could take you on a trip around the world where these are major institutions that are committed to a research agenda, that are funding with what they do each and every day to try and have an impact in society. It is not just going to come from the startups. It will come from many of the large companies that are committed to a transformational agenda, that understand that they're trying to make a difference. I was with the World Bank just last week. The World Bank's, one of their key objectives is to invest in countries and in organizations where they can take what is currently sub-poverty level today, as defined by an individual making $1.25 a day, and be able to get what is today 22% of the world's population down to 3%. There is great aspiration that is inspiring people to do wonderful things, and there's a level of discipline within those organizations for speed and course correction. So I think you're right to challenge if it's entrepreneurial or not, but I would offer, at least from my lens of what I do every day, I see some of the most wonderful organizations committing to this type of transformational agenda to have a profound impact on the world.
Okay, thank you. Well, this has been an incredibly rich discussion. I've learned an enormous amount, and I want to thank the panelists, and I think we all should thank them.